Welcome to Section 3, Using MongoDB from Python with PyMongo. This is the first video, Getting and Managing Connections. As an introduction to our section, we're going to learn how to use MongoDB from Python using the PyMongo driver. To begin with, we're going to learn how to connect to a MongoDB server using Python and the PyMongo driver. We'll look at how to connect to both local servers that were running maybe on your laptop for development purposes, as well as remote servers, which may be configured as a replica set or a sharded cluster. Second, we'll see how we can use PyMongo to do create, read, update, and delete operations, as well as introspection and index creation and deletion. Then we'll start looking at cursors and how we can manage cursors in PyMongo. It's slightly different from how we manage them inside the shell. So we'll see how we can iterate through those cursors and page through data. Also, we'll see how we can limit the result set that we get back and how we can sort our results. Finally, we'll take a look at the bulk operation API. This allows us to do very fast updates of MongoDB databases, so you could use them for your extract, transform, and load scripts, or whenever you need to do a bulk load of data into the database. So, getting into video 3.1, Getting and Managing Connections. The first thing that we need to do is actually get a connection to the database. So in this video, we're going to learn how to connect to a local MongoDB server, how to connect to a replica set, and also how we could connect using a web framework. In this case, we're going to use Flask-PyMongo to show how you could get a MongoDB connection from within a Flask application. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump to the shell. So before we do anything, we really need to have an environment to work in for Python and MongoDB. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a virtual environment. Now this is a little bit, if you're not familiar with virtual environments, that's a little bit beyond what we're covering in this course, but you can certainly look up the documentation for that. It's virtual, and I'm going to say I want Python 3 virtual environment. I'll call it env. So what this is doing is it's creating an isolated virtual environment for all of the Python packages that I'm about to install. So now I'm going to activate it by saying source env bin activate. Okay, so now I'm active. Now to install PyMongo, and I'm going to now install PyMongo as well as the Jupyter notebook so that I can do some of the demonstrations here. Now the Jupyter notebook is going to be available to you from the download URL, so you'll be able to follow along with all of the examples here. So I'm going to use pip to install this, so pip install PyMongo. I'm also going to install Jupyter, and I'm going to install Flask-PyMongo so that I get that for the final connection examples here. So I'll do that. Turns out I've downloaded all of these, so this should download a bunch of files to your laptop, and then it's going to install all these packages. It takes just a second for me because I've already downloaded them. Okay, so now that everything's installed, I can type Jupyter notebook, and after a brief delay, it will come up with the notebook. Now this notebook, the idea is we can have Python sessions, we can see Python commands, run them, and see the output right there in the web browser. So you'll be able to follow along with these. So we're going to open up the Getting and Managing Connections notebook, and we'll be able to start here. Now this is a live Python kernel. You can do all of these things at the Python command line as well as inside a Python script, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using the Jupyter notebook. So to get a local connection, the first thing that we need to do is import PyMongo. So here I do that, import PyMongo, and now I'm going to use the Mongo client class to get a connection to that server. So I do that, and if I print out the client local, then we see that it is a Mongo client. It is by default connected to localhost port 27017, and then there's a few other options that are used here. The document class, normally it's going to give you back all of your documents as Python dictionaries. You can set whether you want date times to be times unaware or not. And finally, you can delay the connection until you actually do some operation on the client. In this case, I didn't delay it. So just to make sure that everything is working fine, I'm going to use the server info method of the local client so that I can find out whether I'm actually connected to a server. And indeed I am, so it gives me a lot of information about the server build. So I can see things like it's a 64-bit build, all of the different build options here. And particularly, the version is 3.4.2, so that's the database version that I'm connecting to. So that's the simplest case, where you're connecting to the default server with all the default options. Now I've also set up a remote server for the purposes of this class using the MongoDB Atlas cloud hosting system. So what you do here is you actually need to give it a connection string. So connection strings we covered in the previous section, but just to refresh your memory, we use the MongoDB scheme, and we use a username and password, in this case it's Rick and Pact, and then we list the 3 servers in the replica set, and then finally we give some extra options. So this is going to be an SSL connection. We're going to specify the name of the replica set that we're connecting to, and also what database we need to authenticate against. So I give it that connection string, I'm going to create a client, and now I can actually ask it what are the nodes of this connection. So it tells me it's actually connected to all 3 of these servers. So in MongoDB, if I were to say that I can read from secondaries, it might send it to any one of these servers, but all of my writes are going to be going to the primary. So also to make sure that everything's working here, I can just check and see is the server info give me good results. So indeed, this client here is also giving me good results. In this case, it's also a 3.4.2 server, same version that I was using before. Now, if you've got this connection string, that's probably a fairly convenient way to connect. Depending, however, on the way that you're configuring your application, you may want to have the different parts of this connection string in different places, and it might be kind of a pain to format it as a URL. So if you prefer, you can also pass it all of the command line, all of the same arguments as separate commands or separate options to the Mongo client constructor. So in this case, I've listed the 3 servers in the replica set as seeds to the replica set, and it's going to connect to those seeds. I'm going to say it's an SSL connection, and I'm going to give it the replica set. And I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to tell it what authentication database I'm using or username and password. So I can connect there. I still have the same nodes, but now if I want to actually authenticate, I have to grab the admin database from the client and authenticate against that, and then I'll be able to do server info. All right. The next thing that I wanted to show is how you could connect to a database using Flask, just to give you an example of using this from a web framework. What I have here is a very simple Flask application, and what we're going to do is we're going to connect to our local database, and we're going to look at the restaurants collection and just retrieve restaurants by cuisine. So it's a very simple single URL application. So what I'm going to do here is, if you're familiar with Flask, this is a single route Flask application. So I import Flask, I import my request and response. I'm also going to import the dumps utility from bson.json util. This is something you get from PyMongo, and what it'll do is it'll take all of the bson extensions to JSON, and it'll come up with a JSON safe encoding for them. So that's pretty handy when you need to send things back over the web. And then I'm also going to import my PyMongo from Flask-PyMongo. So here I create my Flask application, I build my PyMongo app, and in my main application here I want to configure that application to give it the URI. There's also ways to configure this with separate arguments based on connecting to a replica set, all of the different options there. And then once I've got that configured, then I call mongo.init-app, and what that'll do is it'll create a connection to the database which will be available to me in the request context. So then when I'm inside my route, I can use Mongo, which is here, that maps back to this global variable Mongo.db, and that's whatever database I'm connected to, and then I can just get the restaurants collection, and then I can find cuisine. We'll get into more detail on how you can actually query the database, but that's the basic idea here. So once we've got that, I'll create a new tab here, and then I'll be able to run my application. I've just saved it here as restaurants.py. Let's make sure that's the right one there. That's the same thing. So I can just come in here and I can say Python restaurants.py. Go ahead and create myself another tab. I'll be able to curl localhost 5000 restaurants, and I'm going to give it a cuisine of bakery. So curl localhost 5000 restaurant, and I'll give it a cuisine of bakery, and I get a number of bakeries here. I can also limit this to a single result. So it's going to tell me it's got a limit of 1, there were 691 bakeries, and then it's going to give me the first bakery here. So if you'd like to look up some of these resources, you can find information on PyMongo, the full documentation at api.mongodb.com. I've got the link right there. If you would like to learn more about Flask-PyMongo or Flask itself, you can look at flask-pymongo.readthedocs.io. In this video, we learned how to connect to local or remote MongoDB database servers and replica sets using PyMongo, and how to connect to a MongoDB server from Flask using Flask-PyMongo.